Good afternoon, folks. How's your PAX going? All right. So before we begin, I got a quick question. Who here likes Spyro? Now, who here got dragged here by their loved one? There we go. And who here has no idea where they are? Bathrooms are down there to the left. So welcome to From Pete to Spyro, the legend of Spyro the Dragon, my very first panel at PAX East. So, for those who don't know, who am I? My name is Canadian Guy A. My real name's Aaron, but that's my online username. And I got to be doing two things at once, so forgive me if things are kind of messed up. The content focus has always been really Crash and Spyro, and we've been talking about Crash and Spyro and deep dive analyses and live streams for years. We started in 2017 and went full-time in 2018, and I say we because it's really me, friends, and all of you, so thank you. And we also, just a few more details, the channel has conducted a number of interviews over the years, whether it's with current Reignited developers, whether it's with Insomniac and anyone in between. We've been trying to get stuff for people from Dawn of the Dragon, and we've been able to get a bunch of information and unearth things that are new to the fan base and fandom. Now, this is something that I get yelled at in my comments all the time, is people screaming source. So I figured that I'd right up front explain to each and every one of you what the source of some of the information of these slides are. Old interviews from the original Insomniac teams, from PlayStation Underground and historical testimonials, and again, this is all the information within this presentation. Development assets, some analysis of original treatments and prototypes and even early color tests of Spyro the Dragon from different employees and different places. Also, personal and direct interviews. I actually had a personal visit with Toys for Bob back in 2018 when they were developing the Reignited trilogy and got to see some things that were interesting and unique, and I will not confirm nor deny that there was originally a Snoop Dogg dragon that was removed at the end of development. And of course, approved but slightly secret secrets. So there will be some information in here that is slightly secretive, nothing crazy, and there are tidbits from private conversations and emails and rumors and suggestions, and they will be all clearly marked as that. So just to be sure that everyone knows. So, last thing before we hop in, what is developer perspective? Well, here's the thing, is that as much as we love certain games, sometimes it doesn't translate well with the developers. Sometimes the developer's experience is they hated developing that game and you loved it. Other times they loved developing a game and you thought it was a heaping pile of trash. So, understand that we are going to be trying to be using the developer experience, but it is subjective. Contradictory memories. Sometimes two developers are from two different sides of the fence, and one will say this happened, one will say another, and they might be contradictory, so just understand that. Human discrepancies. Spyro almost came out 30 years ago, and a lot of these guys and gals are older now when they started, and as you know, you forget things. I barely remember if I had breakfast this morning, so understand that there may be holes and missing details. And we have done extensive sourcing to try to complement for all of this. And so, as always, when you begin Spyro, the adventure begins. Now, we can't talk about Spyro without talking about Insomniac Games. Now, Insomniac Games, before Spyro, worked on a game called Disruptor, and it was made for the 3DO. I'm sure all of you know what that is. It was so successful that everyone would immediately hear, no, nobody knew what it was. So basically, it was a console that was released where they thought, hey, why don't we have it that any company could make our console? Maybe Sanyo, maybe Panasonic, maybe they can make our console for us. And they didn't think about the library of games and exclusivities and how one didn't work towards the other. So they also costed $700 in 1989. So, not so great. So, Insomniac knew that it was not going to work. So they decided to look for a new platform, and that platform just happened to be the PlayStation. So they faced complete and total collapse. Excuse me. They were about to collapse, and they needed to find someone new to take the project. And so that led to Universal. So Mark Cerny, who I believe is currently the PlayStation architect designer, was working at Universal Interactive. And he was the last phone call, their last hope. And not only did Mark Cerny actually publish Disruptor under the Universal Interactive's name, he actually mentored them for their next move. And his advice to Insomniac was to make something family-friendly, something that was easier to market, and something that would make more money. So there were two pitches that Insomniac came up with. Craig Stitt, one of the designers, came up with a dragon game. Simply, dragons were basically dinosaurs with wings. That's his quote, not mine. And the second was actually an alien game. There was going to be an alien invasion that took place on Earth. So since you are all sitting here, I think you know what he chose. But if you are sharp, you may not know that that alien game eventually did get made and became Resistance: Fall of Man, which came out for the PlayStation 3. And we can see some of the in-game monstrous things. This is probably the most horrible thing you'll see in the entire panel. So. Of course. Right. So, this is an actual direct treatment of a concept for the game. And as you can see in the top left corner, it's called Dragon Game. That's basically where you're kind of figuring things out. And originally, the idea was that you were going to basically be a tank as a dragon. If you look all the way to the right, it might be hard to see, but it will say that fire was originally set up to be where you'd be running around and it would lock on, almost like the Nevi from Legend of Zelda, and then you would breathe fire and be able to hold that fire. And then when you ran out of energy, you had to replenish it with treasure. So of course, this was just an early adaptation, as this was made in December 13th of 1996. And so eventually, Carl Zambellis designed what we eventually would know as Spyro, but at the time was named Pete. And, of course, Pete was originally green. Now, everyone has heard of Pete. That's the name of the title of this whole presentation. However, there was one more before Pete that I want to present to you, and that was actually Pierre. Now, Spyro was originally designed to actually replicate and mirror Bart Simpson. At the time, Simpsons was incredibly popular, and Bart, of course, being the most popular character, so they thought that they would create some sort of a prankster dragon, and they named him Pierre. And we actually have a direct quote of the character here. Once upon a time, there was a small green dragon, and his name was Pierre. Pierre was only a young dragon. He was just 113 years old. Now, since Pierre was just getting his firepower, he liked to play tricks on people with his fire. After he got out of school, he would go into the forest and sneak up on people who were fishing or picking apples or digging a hole. And he would go whoom and fire them right in the bum. The people would go running, saying, "Pierre, you are a silly, mean dragon." Yeah, you can tell that that's not what the end result was. But that was what they were going with at the time. So there was another issue, though. There was one or two issues. You know, I'm from Canada, so up in the, white north, have you guys heard of a company called Disney? Yeah, they are known for their very loose copyright laws. They are so good. They allow things happen all the time. Heavy dose of sarcasm. No, of course, having a green dragon named Pete, with Pete's dragon being right there, they were lining themselves up for a lawsuit. So Insomniac had to come up with their first fix, which was, oh, by the way, I forgot to mention, have you ever played Spyro? Yeah. How much green is there? And what would happen if you had a green dragon on green grass running around everywhere? You can't see squat. It is not a good idea. So Insomniac had to eventually come to the conclusion that not only do they have to change the name, they have to change Pete's color. So here we actually have some early color tests. If it will not play. Awesome. Yes, hold on. Like I said, we had some technical difficulties getting into here, so hopefully we can just quickly fix this up if possible. Great. Are we able to fix it? No? Okay. Well, we'll try our best. So I just want you to imagine different colored Spyros because there's going to be a few videos here that are not going to be playing here, but that's okay. We only got like 4. So anyway. Come on. There we go. So Project Pete was a pitch made. This was actually one of the developments sent to the commercials and like not the commercials, I apologize, the reporters and stuff, giving them some details and ideas of what the game would be and what was coming. And even at this point, it was called Pete. And Craig Stitt actually went on to stay, and actually stays here, that Pete wasn't supposed to be his final name, but it stuck so well, they just couldn't find a new name. So they were stuck on it. And even when they were sending it out to advertisers, they still were calling him Pete. So, to the title of today's presentation, From Pete to Spyro. So there was actually a few theories and thoughts towards the naming of Spyro, and there's 3 in total. The first was actually the 5-letter industry theory, which was there was an industry theory that platformers had short 5-letter names actually marketed better, like Mario, Sonic, and the sister franchise, of course, Crash Bandicoot. And Pyro was originally the name that they were fiddling around with, that they were trying to workshop and get right, and eventually you add an S and you get Spyro. But there's also a loose language connection here because the word pyro in Greek means fire, but in Latin, Spyro, with an I, means breathe. So if you have Spyro, it's kind of a loose play on fire breather. And then Craig Stitt actually commented on the channel officially and stated that according to Craig Stitt, the name Spyro was originally actually pitched by Brian Hastings, who was one of the key developers of the entire franchise. And it was initially rejected by Sony, only to be approved several months later, and the employee at Sony took credit, and Brian Hastings did not. So Brian still has quite a bit of sour grapes about it even to today. Here is actually some concept art, original sketch concept art from Insomniac of their level designs. You can actually see this as Peacekeepers, and you can see the different ways that they wanted to design some of the levels and the way that they went with it. So that's that. Now, when I went to Toys for Bob in 2018, this was one of the craziest things. They had the original hand-sketched drawings of every single character and level designed on pencil, not scanned, the original, all laminated for all 3 games in each of the books. And Insomniac loaned them the Toys for Bob to actually use, for them to study and to use. And when I went to visit, they let me flip through this. And I wanted to like wear those white gloves and just gingerly pass each one because I was so scared to rip anything. But anyway, years later, Spyro the Dragon launches. Spyro launched on September 9th, 1998 in North America to critical acclaim. And of course, it was also a commercial success, almost selling 5 million units, which now, even nowadays, is still impressive, but back then was even more impressive. The score was conducted by Stuart Copeland, and if you're unaware, Stuart Copeland is the original drummer for The Police, a very famous band. And of course, as I said, critical reception, highly praised the game's innovation, and 3D graphics. Now, if you're from across the pond, you may not see it as this for the second game. You may not see this as Ripto's Rage, but as Gateway to Glimmer. So when the next Spyro game came out, Spyro 2, Ripto's Rage was the North American name. However, Gateway to Glimmer was the UK name. I still don't know why they called it Gateway to Glimmer, because you're there for like 10 seconds and then you leave. I think Gateway to Avalar would have been better, but I had a lot of people argue with me about that to the end of time. But my comment sections is a war zone, ladies and gents. So Spyro's 2 Ripto's Rage was a completely new world, a new world called Avalar. It introduced a bunch of mini-games and side missions. and secondary objectives to enhance replayability. It also introduced a whole bunch of new abilities like head bash, swimming, flying, and it introduced backtracking to some mixed responses even today. And of course, brand new iconic characters like Hunter, Alora, the Professor, and more, which actually we're going to take a look at right now because we have some of the original sketches from Oliver Wade of both Alora and the Professor. Now, I actually want you to take a look at the pencil lines behind Alora because we're going to be talking about that later on because Alora wasn't always a fawn. We also have Crush, Gulp, and some nightmare fuel that we call Moneybags. I don't know what happened. I think the person who modeled his final model probably had nightmares creating it because that is not Moneybags. That is horrifying. Yeah, let's just get the next slide, please. So, as I stated, that Spyro was originally inspired by Bart Simpson. But then it created Pierre. And as they continued to develop and as they continued to refine the character, they actually got to a point where they started to pull those prankster qualities out. So not as prankster, and they kept pulling it back, pulling it back. However, one of the things that actually came through was his voice direction, which was done by Carlos Alazraqui, who is most known for Rocko's Modern Life. And as many of you know, as we get to the next awkward slide, we know that he was replaced by Tom Kenny, the legendary voice actor that we know today as SpongeBob replaced for Spyro. Now, the question that a lot of people have asked in my comment sections and threads everywhere is why the change? There are some facts, theories, speculation, and the first was a new character direction. They had shifted from that Bart Simpson-esque character that they wanted to do and just wanted just a straight snarky, confident protagonist. There was also a strongly handed rumor that they were annoyed by Carlos's take. By the time they were finished recording, they were like, "We're done, no more. We can't take it anymore." And so they wanted to replace Carlos. And they also felt that there was a natural progression because they thought that Spyro from Spyro 1 to Spyro 2 would be older, and as you get older, your voice changes, and so they felt that the more mature voice was a better take. And fun fact, this was Tom Kenny's first ever voice acting role in a video game, even before SpongeBob. So that's interesting and fun. Then we get to Spyro 3, Year of the Dragon, which a lot of people consider as the best Spyro. A completely new realm to explore, exploring a new place from the original Dragon Realms, the Forgotten Realms. New playable characters. For the very first time, you could play as brand new characters that you've never been able to play before, and even an old face, which included Sparks with the Sparks levels. So it also introduced a skateboarding minigame that was incredibly popular. I can attest that I spent many hours competing with my sister to get the highest score in that minigame. And also, this was Insomniac's finale, and before they even put pen to paper, they knew that this was going to be their finale. And once again, we got some Oliver Wade sketches here. We have Sheila, who has punching gloves and horns, and if you look very closely, she had hair. Believe it or not, people were angry that the new version had hair, but if you look here, she actually originally had hair, and there's a reason why. And of course, we have Bentley, and we have Agent 9, which Agent 9 would eventually become the core basis and foundation for Ratchet and Clank in the future. And of course, we have Bianca, and who is that? Oh, that's right, that's a sorceress. So much like Moneybags, you can kind of get an idea as to sometimes the final sketch is not necessarily the final design, which we'll actually be talking about some of the sketches very soon because there's a funny story to that. So, why stop? Why did Insomniac stop making one of the greatest platformers of all time? No thumbs, all problems. One of the things that Insomniac had commented and said was that they felt that they've reached the end of the limitation of Spyro's moveset. And they thought that, hey, he doesn't even have a thumb, and they jokingly said, he can't even hold a gun. So you can see where Insomniac's minds were when they were going there. But they also were incredibly burnt out, pun intended. And if you think about it, it launched in 1998. The Spyro 3 launched in 2000. The rapid release schedule took a horrid toll on the development team. And poor treatment overall. Universal treated both studios, Naughty Dog and Insomniac, quite poorly. And it just added more fuel to the fire, and people were just livid. So we're going to quickly talk about the Universal Sweatshop. They were, again, a dual publisher portfolio. They published both Crash and Spyro games, and they controlled both of gaming's biggest icons when it came to the PlayStation. Crunch, 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 and I don't mean Bandicoot. A lot of crunch. They were forced a lot of unused hours, a lot of unpaid hours, and it was absolutely horrible. Here's a horrible story. What do you need when you are when you are working in a building in the middle of the desert? You need air conditioning, don't you? Well, Universal didn't think so, because what they thought was that after 5 o'clock, even though everyone is forced to do crunch, they would turn the air conditioning off in the middle of the summer in the middle of California. It would get very warm in there, because you have to think, all those old computers, all those servers, no air conditioning. It was quite ripe in there. And of course, there were 7 games between Crash and Spyro released within just 4 years. So Universal was just going to town on trying to make these games. Now, we're actually going to get to some 3 interesting developer stories. One for Spyro 1, one for Spyro 2, and one for Spyro 3. Thought it'd be a good alliteration. So, what in the world is that, you might be wondering? These were, if you didn't know, Spyro 1 originally was supposed to have swimming, which was later introduced in Spyro 2. However, before then, to the left, you have a underwater dragon, and this was going to be the boss. And to your right, you have an Amish dolphin rider. Put that in sentences never before said in the English language. But another fun fact is that the top half of Aquaria Towers was actually repurposed from Spyro 1 and was originally going to be the boss fight for that underwater dragon that you saw. So some assets were scrapped and brought over. So next, we have Elora. And you can see that's Elora, everyone knows her, and I'm going to put up the sketch once more. Now remember I told you about those sketch lines behind her. Elora wasn't originally a fawn, you dork. Sorry, had to do it. She was originally a centaur. And when they designed the character, they found that the PlayStation 1's limitations in polygons made her body and face look horrifying and did not look great. So they had to try to scrape and grab polygons and anything from anywhere to try to make her look presentable. And so they just decided to chop off her back legs and redistribute it elsewhere. And these were decisions that were made in Insomniac, which is incredibly quickly, because they would literally design these things and they would be done by the end of the meeting, and that was the final design. And if something had to be changed, it had to be made right quick. So I actually did an interview with the artist of these original sketches, Oliver Wade, and when we were talking about it, he actually asked if I wanted to have an original sketch of what Elora would have looked like, and I said, absolutely. And he was such a good sport, he decided to show what the original Elora would have looked like as a centaur. No AI, folks. This was completely made by him, and this was done back in like 2021. So yeah, it was incredible. It was incredible to have him on the channel and to actually do that. Now, you might be wondering what this is for. Does anyone know what this level is?
Crystal Islands in Spyro 3.
Correct, Crystal Islands. But Crystal Islands wasn't always a crystal island. You see, originally, Crystal Islands was a boreal forest. So let me give you a breakdown of how these meetings in Insomniac went. You would walk in and you would sit down and you would have 1 week to get this stuff done. Oliver Wade would sit down and the producer and the level developer would start talking about the level's theme and he would start drawing. By the time the meeting was over, the drawings were finished. Done. That was it. And he's being described a boreal forest where there would be beavers and bears and ents and trees and all these different things. So, as even evidenced by the flying beavers that we know in Crystal Islands. And as I said, that there were also bears. Now, this is actually an in-game shot of the bear while they were developing it, while it was still a boreal forest, and this was sourced from the PlayStation Underground video while they were interviewing. So what happened? Well, someone had the bright idea of, nah, boreal forest too boring. It's Crystal Islands now. And so Oliver Wade sat there and said, well, what do? We're crunched. We got the next game. We got the next level we got to do, and we got to design. We got all these creatures. What do we do? Well, if you got a crystal level theme, you make crystal bears. That was the solution, and that was the fix, and they kept going. Oh boy. Now, I had a fun video clip here for everybody, but unfortunately, due to technical difficulties, we won't be able to show it. But we are now entering the disaster. So Insomniac is no longer working on Spyro, and it gets handed off to a brand new team. So Universal decided to tempt fate, because Universal did something unheard of. They found not one, but two back-to-back studios that would become legendary at the end of the day with Insomniac and Naughty Dog. And they just thought, you know what, let's just do it again. We did it twice in a row, but 3 times couldn't be hard. So they decided to hand the Spyro IP to 2 brand new studios, Equinox and Check 6. Do you know how many games they've made in the past? None. Absolutely 0 experience. And so their idea was Spyro Enter the Dragonfly. Again, we had a funny clip here, but hold on, let me skip this here. There we go. It was an absolute disaster. The game was so underbaked, there were glitches galore, and it performed so poorly. But what I can show you real quick, because I can't show the video, here, we'll go forward for a second, just to give you an idea. Why I might not be able to show the video, I can show that. You keep staring at it, it gets worse every time. So we'll go back for a second here. So there were the promises that were made. In the initial early scripts, there was going to be 25 to 30 sprawling levels, consistent 60 FPS performance, unique and diverse environments, incredibly quick load times, an epic evil dragon plot that was stealing dragon essence, and the biggest Spyro game ever. And here comes reality. It had, quite literally, 8 levels in one homeworld. That was it. The frame dives and crashes were so severe the game would just flat out just perish. It would just die in the middle of your gameplay. It was repetitive and many recycled assets. The slowest load times in the series, slower than even the PS1 era. A recycled Ripto boss, which don't talk to me about that, it is horrifying, and often cited as the worst in the franchise. We're back again, folks. So, what happened? Well, again, it was the first-time devs. They had no idea what they were doing, so of course. And it was kind of Universal's fault. Rewrites galore. They were having bi-weekly rewrites where Universal would write the story, Check 6 would start fixing it, and then Check 6 would have an idea, and then Universal would rewrite the story. And then it would happen again, and again, and again, and again, and again, and it just left a giant pile of mash. And ultimately, Universal wanted the game to come out to not miss the Christmas season. So even though it was unpresentable in any way, they decided, hey, let's just push it out anyway. And you would think that if you were sitting in the offices that they were making a game for Mortal Kombat, because they quite literally got into fist fights within the studio arguing about how to get this game out. It was quite a troubled time. So what was the conclusion that you might as well come up with? Take what you got, Frankenstein it together, and ship it out. And ship it out they did. So there was a commercial here, if anyone remembers, which was absolutely horrifying, of a farm getting destroyed by random fire. We didn't see Spyro, it was just disaster. And Stuart Copeland, the legend that made the original soundtrack, saw that and said, you know what? I'm done. Literally made him quit just from a commercial. He said, after I'm finished this, I'm not touching Spyro again. The ship has sailed. We've jumped the shark. Whatever term you want to go with, it was a disaster. Come on. There we go. So, we now get to a legendary reboot. Now, before we get there, there is a game that I have to talk about, and that's Spyro: A Hero's Tale. Now, it was essentially the one last crack at trying to make an OG Spyro, but it was still seen as kind of a soft reboot, and it was a significant improvement from Enter the Dragonfly, significantly. Having said that, it was still overall I wouldn't say a mixed, but a soft reception, and it was not enough to be able to save itself from its predecessor. The Enter the Dragonfly's damage was too much, and unfortunately, A Hero's Tale did okay. I'm not going to say bad. It did okay, and I think that's fair. But Hero's Tale also introduced two other versions and other dragons. There was Flame, which is red Spyro with a bigger nose. I would love to ask the pitch on that, because actually Ember, or at the time, Ember at the end there, is incredibly creative and a big fan favorite. So I don't know what happened with Flame. He also only has like 2 lines. So maybe that's why. And now it's time to go to the real Legend reboot, The Legend of Spyro. The Legend of Spyro: A New Beginning had come out, and it was a completely different game. It was a completely different reboot. None of the story from the original was taken. It was a completely new concept. It was a brand new genre in the fact that they didn't use platforming as its core anymore. It was now back to it's more like fighting and a lot of combat, a lot of move from one area to area B and fight there, right? Over and over and over again. So, there also were new elemental breaths. So while Spyro was able to still breathe fire, he was also able to breathe electricity, earth, and ice whenever he wanted as he progressed through the game. And a completely whole new cast of characters. Most characters are completely new, with having very few ties to previous games. But the biggest addition to the franchise, I think, that most people who are familiar would agree with, was Cinder. Cinder became a very, very, very big fan favorite overall, and still is to this day. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about Dawn of the Dragon, because Dawn of the Dragon was almost a completely different game from the original 2 within its trilogy. It was an open-world dragon game that promised free flight, and it was the conclusion to the Legend franchise. And it was a die-hard cult classic. People who are fans of this game, who like this game, not only like it, they love it. If you want to get beat down on the Reddit thread, go out and state that you don't like this game, and you will have prompt responses very quickly. This game is held very tightly to a lot of people's hearts. And one of the highlights of it is that it had actually co-op, and you could play as Cinder. But the common critiques that I will say, hopefully Reddit doesn't, get mad at me. Co-op and flight controls were definitely not the best. At times, and this is my term here, it felt like Spyro but God of War. That was kind of what I felt about it. And Cinder's voice acting was pretty wooden. If you ever played it, it's pretty rough. And of course, they absolutely ruined Malefor's voice. Now, some of you of older fans might be wondering, who's Malefor? Well, Malefor was essentially the corrupted firstborn, which they established in the game, being that purple dragons are these legendary prophetic dragons that will get all of these new additional powers, while all other dragons only had one. And Malefor was the first purple dragon, and he kind of went nuts. And he basically gained a primal power called convexity, or dark aether, and kind of just wanted to destroy the world, as one does. So eventually, it was actually voiced by the legendary Mark Hamill, who, of course, is Luke Skywalker. Now, we had a video, but you couldn't tell because it was awful. They decided to put 1,000 reverbs on it, and you could not tell who it was. It could have been me behind the microphone, and you wouldn't have known. There was so many filters. You couldn't understand. You needed subtitles. It was a requirement, not a want, not an ask. It was a requirement because you could not understand the marbles that were coming out of his mouth. That's exactly what, I don't know how you can take a legendary voice actor like that and absolutely just botch the voice. Yeah, man. There we go. So next we're going to go to the next reboot, which is, Okay. So before we continue, you might be wondering, what on earth is this early, late 2000s, edgy, garbage work? No, I'm serious. I'm asking you what's going on here. This is Spyro Revolution. Spyro Revolution was originally pitched by, or was brought to Vivendi before they merged with Activision. And they decided to create a true, dark, and gritty Spyro. And they achieved that in the worst sense of the word. So this was their designs. It totally doesn't look like gargoyles or anything. And the one thing I want to note, too, is Spyro now has laser eyes. Now, I don't know if you guys are aware, but dragons breathe fire. So him having laser eyes and breathing fire is like duct taping a pistol to a shotgun. I don't know why. But not just Spyro, Hunter as well. I don't know why you guys are complaining. It just looks like a Khajiit from the Elder Scrolls. I mean, it does not scream Hunter. So now it was Toys for Bob's turn. So after Vivendi merged with Activision, Toys for Bob actually explored radical new directions for actually not just Spyro, but Crash Bandicoot as well. And after a bunch of exploration, they decided, you know what, we're going to settle with Spyro and we're going to do yet another reboot. So the first take was actually a realistic Spyro, where it was a true high fantasy dragon game. They quickly determined, no, we're not going to do that. Then they decided to create Tiny Spyro, where he was this big and would run along on tabletops and interact with the real world. And they were like, okay, getting warmer, getting different, okay. And then there was Spyrogami, where imagine Spyro Paper Mario, where Spyro would quite literally change into different forms and fly around and do his thing. And it was called, according to what I was told by direct message, it was called Spyrogami at the time. And of course, this was Toys for Bob riffing and trying to figure out what to do with these franchises. And they actually created some custom physical hardware where there would be mini games that would have completely additional purchase necessary hardware, like dragon eggs, and I just put it in quote, controller hats. I don't know what that is. I didn't want to ask. I was too nervous. But yes, there were controller hats. Just imagine a ball cap on a PlayStation controller, I guess. So we're entering warm waters here, so please, for those who want to boo, please. The dawn of the new genre. Eventually, Toys for Bob wanted to capitalize on actually Activision's manufacturing pipeline that was used for Guitar Hero. And they decided to make a gotta-catch-em-all collectible toy system. And we can actually see here some of the first original prototypes. I want you to pay attention to that center dragon there because we're going to be talking about him in a few minutes. This eventually led to the creation of Spyro's Kingdom. Spyro's Kingdom would then eventually become, as we know, Skylanders Spyro's Adventure. So, Toys for Bob at one point was actually playing what I like to call the Spyro Hokey Pokey. Because when they started this development, they were like, hey, Spyro's going to be a playable character. And then said, no, we're not going to do that. And then they said, well, it's got to have Spyro in it. Okay, so let's make him an NPC. He's kind of the king. He is the king of Spyro's Kingdom. And then they were like, hey, let's make this fire dragon. And then they were like, what's the point of calling it Spyro's Kingdom if you can't play as Spyro? And so they looked at these images and said, I have a brilliant plan. Ta-da! here we have the final design of the Skylanders Spyro design. And yeah, it's a thing. It happened. It's under your bed at night. Let's just say the backlash was palpable. It was chaos, and it created quite a rift in the Spyro community. And I can attest to that. The design was not great, but there was allegedly a reason why he looked like this. And the reason why was because it was the way that he was shaped made manufacturing much, much easier. And they knew that because they were going to be doing mass production of these toys, they knew that they would need to pump them out as quick as possible and all the different versions. And they found that this shape was the best. So, yay. So whether or not you agree or like Skylanders, some love it, some hate it, some are lukewarm, some are in between. The thing that you can't deny is that history was made because it became the blueprint for a massive genre. And while it wasn't exactly the first, Skylanders did establish the Toys to Life blueprint, and it successfully merged those collectibles and digital gameplay together. And if you didn't know, it set the commercial standard, and it generated $3 billion. That's a lot of plastic toys rattling around in kids' chests. And it also eventually led to other successful games like Disney Infinity, Lego Dimensions, and of course what is still around today, Nintendo's Amiibo. So even Nintendo can copy things once in a while. Now, we have a reignited return. Now, before Spyro, there was Crash. And Crash Bandicoot's, the Crash Bandicoot Insane Trilogy, for those who don't know, was the remake of the original 3 Crash games. And it was an insane success. I know I'm using that pun, but it is very, very apropos. It was an incredible success. And essentially, what it led to was people playing it and saying, wow, this is great. Why can't this happen for Spyro? And so a community hunt started. This is where people started to explore and think and be like, you know, are there hints? Let's look at manufacturing. Let's look at early Reddit leaks. Let's try our best, and we're looking everywhere. And fun fact, this is where my channel began. And just as a fun little throwback, the very first thumbnail of my very first Spyro comeback video that I ever made, how much I would change now. Why red text? I must ask, why red text? Anyway, while we were hunting for hints, Toys for Bob actually began development for Spyro. And this was actually his previs of what he looked like when they were pitching the game and figuring it all out. And it was an insane pivot because they weren't originally supposed to make Spyro. They were supposed to make Crash Bandicoot 4, or the next Crash Bandicoot game after the success. But at that same point, they were switching to the Unreal Engine. And they're like, hey, we have no idea what we're doing. We're doing a brand new game and a brand new engine. Why don't we do a game that we are familiar with on the new engine first as a practice? And Activision said, sure, go ahead. Let's do Spyro. So Toys for Bob was comfortable with Spyro because they've worked with Spyro. However, Activision turned around and said, can you get it done in a year? All 3 games in 1 year. Now, I think the actual number was 11 months, which doesn't help. But Toys for Bob triumphed and pushed forward and said, all right, let's go for it. And it actually was such a massive scale because they wanted a similar deadline to what they did with Crash Insane. They thought, potato, Crash and Spyro, same thing, right? It's the exact same thing. We gave Vicarious Visions about a year to make it. Why can't you? Well, as Spyro fans know, Spyro's a bit bigger than Crash Bandicoot, just a little bit. So eventually, we got to the final design, which was made by the incredibly talented Nicholas Cole, where we have a younger-looking Spyro, not with the. They were saying that the V crests on his chest was to try to make him look a little bit younger. And eventually, we came to the final design for Spyro in the Reignited trilogy. Now, if you weren't aware, that there was a bit of a development drag, specifically a drag in. Toys for Bob's, I don't know if you're aware of this, Toys for Bob is incredibly creative. And they love to create beautiful, beautiful pieces of art. And so when they started to figure out the dragons, they were like, hey, we need to try to match the original design aesthetic. So we can see here Aster giving his interview, and we can actually see what the original sketch was going to be. And they really wanted to try to keep that PlayStation 1 aesthetic, but still make it look familiar. And also, just another example, this is Nestor's design too, which is most commonly everyone's first dragon right when you start the game, unless you're speedrunning. So, we had an animation test here. Just picture an old dragon shaking, okay? He's old and he's looking around. That was the animation test. So, just picture that for now. But then Toys for Bob was like, hey, you know what would be really cool? What if this would work? There we go. What if one dragon had like earrings? And then eventually they're like, hey, you know what? This dragon having a pouch would be cool. And then, oh, this one could have a hat, and that one could have a weapon, and that one, and eventually the original dragon designs became quite a lot more elaborate and wild. And as you can see, all of the different dragons here, if you know game development, different rigs, different skins, different everything. And actually, they were about to say, hey, you know what we're going to do next? We're going to have them walk around the homeworlds. The engineers wanted to fire lasers at Toys for Bob for asking that. Like, no, absolutely not. And not to mention, you have 1 year. So this was Nestor's original design, as I showed you. And this was his reignited design. So you can see what they really did was Toys for Bob wanted to lean into their different jobs. So you got the artisan homeworld, well, you got an artisan dragon. You got a peacekeeper, well, you got warriors. And so they really leaned into those different themes. There were scientists and everything, all related to the different, all the different themes and schemes. There we go. And we can also see here what the original scene looked like and what the final scene looked like in Reignited. So you can see quite the departure from the original design, but still very beautiful. So some of the key points for Reignited. It was an immediate commercial and critic success, and it sold 10 million plus units. And it became the most successful Spyro game since the original trilogy. It has sold more than the original trilogy, and has been the most successful critically since the trilogy. Make sure I got that wording right. And it was a legendary return once more. Tom Kenny actually came back to revoice all of the characters, but not just that, not all the characters, can you imagine a Spyro game where it's just Tom Kenny? Where every character is just Tom Kenny? Let me rephrase that. He came back to revoice Spyro for his original 2 games, for Spyro 2 and 3, but he also revoiced Carlos's take on Spyro 1. Stuart Copeland saw this and actually decided to come back and actually help and assist with the tracks, and also created a brand new track for the title when you actually start the game. It's called Tiger Train. I don't know why he called it that. I'm still questioning that to this day. But nonetheless, Stuart Copeland did return. And as I stated, it was actually developed by 2 developers. Toys for Bob did the original 2 games, and Sanzaru was brought on later to do the 3rd game because they were realizing we are running out of time and we need a second studio to help us out. And Sanzaru, rest in peace now, came on to help out. So now what? We enter the zone of unknown. I want to be clear with what I'm about to talk about here. This is less based, less backed, a lot more. We're entering the zone of unknown. So be clear with that. Something that I have spoken plenty about, probably too much, because I have, according to my own YouTube analytics, have the title Spyro 4 in 70 different videos. Listen, we gotta get to the even 100. We gotta get to an even 100 before I stop. But if you guys may have been around, there was a story that had broke back in March 2024 that a brand new Spyro was in development. I was the one who broke that story. I was the one that was given the information about and had explored and came to that conclusion. But since then, more concrete details. There's a lot of speculative details, but more concrete details have actually come out since then. And one of them is the fact that they are both partnership with both Xbox and Activision, and that it was pitched in December 2023, and then it was signed in January 2024. The scope of it is defined as a big and ambitious action-adventure game. The gameplay will retain its platforming aspects, but will have RPG-inspired elements. And finally, the game will be made on the Unreal Engine 5 engine. There is more stuff floating around that I will hold my tongue on because I don't want to say something remiss or I don't want to get in trouble. Let's just say that. I don't want to get in trouble. Having said that, I would be looking forward to this year. That's all I'm saying. So, I just want to kind of get back to the beginning here for a second. When I started as a fan, this was the Spyro that I knew. And this is the Spyro that I loved. But there was also some that were introduced here on the GBA games. Some were unfortunately introduced here, which is Enter the Dragonfly. Even the model is bad. Anyway, every time I look at it, it just looks worse. Anyway, if this was where you were introduced and you're still a Spyro fan today, bless your heart, because I don't know how you could have even proceeded since then. Then you may have been introduced to A Hero's Tale. Now, years later, maybe you got a PlayStation 2 and you played A Hero's Tale. Or, sorry, The Legend of Spyro. Maybe you wanted a new Dragon game back around the PS3 and you were introduced to Dawn of the Dragon. Believe it or not, the people that were playing this as kids are now full-grown adults and driving around. They pay taxes now. It's terrifying. Or maybe you're young, and that was the first Spyro that you knew. Spyro has had a diverse history and development ups and downs, but however way you consume Spyro, however that you enjoy Spyro, no matter what, you are still a fan, you're still a part of this community, and it is amazing to be able to be in this room with you, with my friends who have been here since the beginning, and with all of you who have been with Spyro since the beginning, or close to the end as well. Thank you. Now, luckily, we have about 7 minutes for questions. So if anybody would like to ask a question, you can line up behind the podium, behind the microphones. There's a set here. And if I will also be outside the con floor over by the windows by Bumblebee after the con is finished, if there's any more that you wanted to talk or ask about, and I will try my best to answer. So we're going to start with right here.
No worries. Okay. G'day, mate.
G'day.
Good to see you again.
Good to see you.
I'm going to make it a quick one for you.
Sure.
Spyro 1 had frog-like Gnorcs.
Yep.
Ripto had the dinosaur guys in Enter the Dragonfly, and Sorceress had those Rhinox.
Sure.
If you had to make a blank Orcs, what animal would you make as the thing that you would fuse with a fantasy creature?
You put me right on the spot right away, man. Come on now. So I think that there would be a really interesting concept of, it's almost like a play off the lava lizards almost, but almost being jealous of dragons. So like lizards, flightless dragons, and they're upset that they can't fly. And so they have no magic, they can't fly, and so it's just angry lizard gecko people that they can crawl around, but they're angry and jealous that they can't fly or be as cool as dragons.
That would make a great cameo for Dingo Dial.
It would. It would. It would be awesome. Thank you for your question.
Have you seen, literally about a week ago, the channel Burback, which is run by Eddie Burback and his brother Tony, they literally I think like 8 days ago, posted a video that was kind of like a 30-year retrospective on Spyro from their perspective, because they grew up playing Spyro,
Sure.
having played the original Spyro games, and even I think they were first introduced to it through the demo disc.
Yeah.
So have you seen that video? And if you have, what are your thoughts? Or I guess maybe if not, I would definitely recommend checking it out and just yeah.
So I have seen the thumbnail of that video. I was very interested to watch it. Unfortunately, I was crushing to get this one done and wanted to make sure that it was all good and set up for the convention. But it is something on my to-watch list. I also wanted to echo at the bare minimum, because I don't want you to walk away without having your answer or your question answered. I want to say that my story was, for me getting introduced to Spyro as well, was also the demo disc. My brother owned Crash Bandicoot 3, and he came home from school one day and was like, hey, there's a code for this weird game. And it was like, okay, what was it? We punched it in, and when I was introduced to Artisan's Homeworld, jaw agaped, and I would just play Crash 3 to play Spyro, 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 until my parents eventually said, hey, you know what, maybe we should get CG his own game. And my very first game bought for me was Spyro the Dragon. So.
Yeah, it's funny how at the very start of this panel on your slides, you kind of mentioned how like memory is a fickle thing. And like, I don't even remember, I just remember one day we had the PS1 and we had all 3 Spyro games, and I couldn't tell you if those were bought for me as presents or if I wanted, like, so I couldn't even tell you my first intro. I just remember playing it, period. There wasn't a specific memory of, oh yeah, I had this, blah, blah, blah. So,
right.
Yeah, it's funny how that works.
Yeah, it's incredible. Thank you so much for your question. Yeah.
Hey, Canadian Guy A.
Hello.
I'm Ben.
Hi.
So I used to play the Skylanders games back in my teenage years, and I always found it bizarre how they never make it quite clear if Spyro in that game is like from the original trilogy or the Legends games, because they make it clear that in bios he says that he's not from the Skylands, and they don't quite. But of course, Cinder is in it, and Malfoy is in an IDW comic. Where do you stand on like how? Do you think where do you make of it?
So what I make of it is that just like The Legend of Spyro, it's a completely new take on Spyro. The extent that I will go as a fan theory is that Legend of Spyro and Skylanders can be seen as there being a connection there, because at the end of Dawn of the Dragon, the whole world goes to blow up and then it stops and all the islands are floating in midair like Skylands. And the prophecy of there always being a purple dragon to come back and correct the timeline, I would go as far as maybe there being a connection between Legend and Skylanders, where maybe it's Spyro reborn once more. But beyond that, I think that it's a brand new Spyro.
That makes sense.
Thank you. Thank you. Got time for one last question. I got the 2-minute warning.
Nasty Nork.
He's ugly.
He's the villain that started the franchise off.
Yes.
Yet he's not as fleshed out as Ripto the Sorceress.
Absolutely not. You're
How
right.
would you improve him?
I would love to see a flashback of him being just an absolute diabolical garbage of a being, and just absolutely, I want to see how he became a Nork and how he was nasty. I would love to see the fact that the dragons, because if you don't know, there is it's canon, but it's like very loosely canon that the Norks were originally made by the dragons. And they were like, wow, look, we could turn these gems into these creatures. Are they gnomes? Are they orcs? Nah, they're Norks. And basically, they made one big Nork with all these big purple gems, and we're like, heck yeah, this guy's going to be awesome. And he just started to just be absolutely horrifying, and was so bad that they got so angry that they're like, you know what, we're just going to take you and put you right into the garbage heap, which was, funny enough, which is a bit of a pun, a canceled Homeworld. They picked him up and said, there you go, boop, you go in there. And Nasty Nork got angry, stole a bunch of gems, and made a Nork army. So I would love to see him, just them expand on him being so diabolical and not make it, oh, serious and gritty and darky and emotional. No, I want to see full Looney Tunes chaos. And it just make no sense, and him being hilarious. That would be something I would love to see from the nastiest of Norks.
Yeah, you made a video on that. So.
I did. So, okay, everyone. Thank you so much. If you have any questions or anything else, I'll be out here. Thank you.